Hey everyone, and happy Friday. My name is Ryan Catherwood. It is August the 4th, 2023, Friday, 11:30 Eastern, regular alumless time. I'm here with Chris Marshall. Hey Chris, how you doing?
Good, Ryan. How are you?
Good. It's been a good week. We've even exciting announcement. We have our first sponsor of Protopia, Chris. Excuse me. Protopia is our sponsor, which I'm going to introduce. But the fact that we even have a sponsor
Yeah,
of
it's
Alumless is pretty cool. So I'm really excited to announce that Protopia is our sponsor. And the role of AI in today's advancement shop is on the front burner for every senior leader these days. It's not just ChatGPT. For the last 3 years, Protopia has helped university partners like Duke and the London School of Economics scale engagement with alumni and donors using AI. Protopia's technology enables simple, scalable engagement across the 4 case modes for engagement without ever asking a student, alum, or donor to sign up for anything new. It's a lead gen tool for advancement while also a valuable resource for the campus community. Visit protopia.co/alumless for more information and to check out their unique technology. Chris, we have a sponsor.
pretty cool. I think it's a pretty cool thing. I hope people don't criticize us for selling out, Ryan, to be honest with you. But
No.
I don't think that's going to be. I actually believe in this particular product, so I'm totally fine with it being associated with our brand as well. But I want to just add one last thing: is credit to you because you've built this show, you've built this following, you've done most of, not all of the work. I think I've written one of the scripts, Ryan. You've done the other
Yeah.
30. So kudos to you. Congrats.
Well, I mean, for those who are familiar, I'm an independent consultant. I created my own LLC a few years ago. It's not on my LinkedIn profile, but I do work with you, and you introduced me to the Washburn McGoldrick folks, and we do
Yep.
a lot of work together. And for the last few years, I've worked with Max and the team at Protopia as well. And so it is kind of like worlds colliding, but in a good way. And I am the same way that you are. Like, I wouldn't talk about Protopia or recommend we sponsor or have a partnership around the sponsorship if it wasn't worthy of everyone's notice. So
Yeah, I always say, we've talked about this. I stay agnostic on platforms, but when there is a tool that can solve a problem, as long as it's the right problem to be solved, I'll recommend products all the time. So
yeah.
thrilled to have Protopia with us.
Well, we're glad to have everyone joining us today. We are live streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube. We have a great show for you today with our special guest and friend, Brandon Buzbee from the University of North Texas. Brandon is the vice president for university advancement there. And we've known Brandon for some years now, so really excited to have Brandon on the show. If you have any questions for Brandon or Chris or myself, I definitely hope you'll pop them in the chat. And that's actually the comments section on the LinkedIn event. So if you can pop your questions in for any of us during the course of the first 30 minutes, or please introduce yourself, tell us where you're listening in from, what university you represent, and we're glad to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. So Chris, I thought we could open up the conversation before we bring Brandon out about, what do you think vice presidents of advancement are thinking about in their first year on the job? How do you think about someone with Brandon's experience, Brandon comes from the alumni engagement side of the shop, and he'll explain a bit more about the global networks unit during our conversation that he led at University of Denver. But from your perspective, what coming from the engagement side of the shop, how might that influence, a VP's perspective on leading a full advancement program?
Yeah. First of all, I think I know exactly what's on Brandon's mind. To start with the first part of your question, which is, how do I turn off this fire hose? Because I'm sure he's just bombarded with everything in the world he's trying to fix. So turning it off and focusing it on the right things is what typically first time leaders do in roles like that. But on the second part, which is the background that he has, I love it. I think it's a great thing for our industry. I love when people come from outside our industry into it, but I love when people come from the alumni side into a development fundraising focused role, because they bring just that perspective. And you started, I've been in the business for 22 years. I think it was around before me, but I started to see it 2010 to 2015. People like Scott Morey taking roles like at USC in the campaign and then going to Carnegie Mellon, Mark Davis leading alumni and going over to UC Santa Cruz. Armin Afsahi, who worked with Brandon, came out of the alumni side, and now he's the head at University of Chicago. So there's a path, and you see this happening increasingly, which I think is just a really good thing for our industry. So I think it's going to be great. I'd love to hear his thoughts on it too when we bring Brandon in.
Yeah, I think it's great too. And I think I often wonder whether or not alumni leaders often think that it's a possibility to be the vice president of advancement, because there's such often a bias towards those with sort of significant histories of development work. And I think we'll ask Brandon, I think he'd say that, that's pretty important, right? To acquire some development work over the course of your tenure.
Yeah.
But let's bring Brandon out to the show. Hello, Brandon Buzbee. How are you?
I'm well, Ryan. Thanks. How are you?
It's good
Ryan,
to see
the last
you
time
again.
I saw Brandon, he was leaving an elevator in New York at the K Summit at 10 p.m. to go out for a jog. And I went, what the heck are you doing? And he said, got to do it. And he's bolted out.
Like I caught Brandon at the other end for a 7 a.m. coffee. So he's up early and jogging late, right? Well, it's great to have you, Brandon. Happy Friday. I guess I'd like to start by, posing you the same question that I posed to Chris. And it's, what are you thinking about in your first year? And how does your experience coming up kind of through the engagement side of advancement, how has it informed your thinking, if at all, there as you've taken over at University of North Texas?
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity, Ryan. And I don't know if I should be offended or honored to be number 30. I'll assume it's a place of privilege and honor to be number 30. So I'll wear that badge with pride. But I'll take the second part of that first, which is how has engagement really shaped the way that I've thought in the path as I'm coming into UNT. I was so blessed and lucky in my early days to come. It was 2010. Came into the work of alumni engagement from the nonprofit space. So working for a small nonprofit, which, man, if you can cut your teeth in small nonprofit work, you just get your hands on everything and you make messes, and the implications are not as dire. But what a great way to enter into the work of advancement. So when I came into the university space, I remember at UC San Diego, my eyes were just so big because I couldn't believe it was a single person's job to process a gift or a team of 4 to do annual giving. I was just blown away consistently with this scale and size. But in the midst of that, Armin, who is now at the University of Chicago, worked with at Denver as well. He was in the midst of innovation and evolution and revolution by taking the Alumni Association at UC San Diego from a dues-paying membership organization to an all-inclusive model. And he pulled in a guy that knew nothing about membership to flip the model on its head, which was it was brilliant because I didn't know what I didn't know, and it meant I wasn't tied to convention maybe in the same ways that someone that came up purely through the call center and then the Alumni Association as assistant director of membership. And so from the early days, my earliest days in advancement, I was told to embrace 3 things. Number 1, ambition. Armin taught me, be ambitious, be bold, do things that matter and make an impact. Number 2, clear the road. In higher education, we have a lot of reasons to say this is a hurdle, this is red tape, and those may be true and real, but sometimes they can be in your own imagination. And so, plowing the road in some regard is a path towards innovation, and then work your tail off is the third thing. And so taking what I had on the nonprofit side, which is a relationship orientation, a relationship centeredness in the work that I was doing. I was raising money from friends and family to earn my own salary in this small nonprofit, and then pivoting into the alumni engagement space and realizing, the relationship is somewhere in between the institution and myself, and I can facilitate a deeper connection in the institution. Then fast forward 5 years, we've flipped the model at UC San Diego on its head and learned so much about how the work of alumni engagement needed to change, needed to evolve in the midst of a radically changing economy and a midst of radically changing expectations for what alumni engagement was providing to its constituents, had a chance to parlay that into the University of Denver. And again, by the time I was leaving Denver and starting to transition into UNT, it was all about relationships the whole time. I know we'll probably get a chance to talk about technology and tools and AI, but there is a science, and that science is getting more sophisticated and sharper in the space of advancement. I am all about it, but there's also an art to this work, which is the trust you build, the way in which you communicate ideas, the way in which you navigate the complexity of bureaucracy. All of that, I realized as those skills are sharpened, you have an ability to be at the edge, be in the middle of transformational ideas in higher education, whether that's advancing research, whether it's like the mountain campus we were able to establish at the University of Denver, or whether it's imagining new ways to raise support for first-generation college students at a Hispanic-serving, minority-serving institution like the University of North Texas. I just got an appetite at Denver to realize this work can fundamentally affect and scale the greatest aspirations of an institution. And so coming in, again, eyes as wide as they've ever been, at an institution with 46,000 students, and the opportunity to see philanthropy fundamentally impact the lives of students that thought higher education may not even be an option for them has been absolutely incredible. So I've been leaning into that and growing into that. And, we can talk about form and function and all the pieces that kind of fall out from that. But I'm so grateful because that stream of lessons has been consistent throughout. Be ambitious, clear the road, let nothing stand in your way, and work your tail off, and you'll be able to do big things and keep relationships at the center of it all.
Yeah. Focus on relationships, really, that's a part of the key narrative. I'm sure you've been thinking about that and the application of it in your new role. And perhaps that's one of the similarities in terms of how you've been thinking about your work at DU versus the work at UNT. But I have to imagine these are very different schools, right? The University of Denver, small, private, medium-sized private, not small, right? University of North Texas, huge, large public institution. Talk us through what have been your observations, the similarities, the differences when it comes to the two universities, how you've been sizing things up.
Yeah, a lot of differences on the surface. You could look from enrollment to tuition to student population to geography to all of that. But I would say one thing that I learned at Denver and have appreciated here at UNT, working for really incredible leaders matters a lot. I worked with Armin for 5 years at San Diego. I knew what I was getting in a vice president at Denver. But sitting down with the chancellor at Denver, who at that time was Rebecca Chop, with her expressing deep ambition and aspirations for the alumni community and seeing just a different effort going into the alumni work. There were 7 different alumni directors in the 10 years preceding when I got to campus. And so a lot of fits and starts in terms of strategy. But I learned so much from her, and what I got from Chancellor Chop was we were in a car riding up to Fort Collins, Colorado for an alumni event. And, it's one of my first events, new guy on campus. You're anxious. You want really to make an impression, and got there, and the alumni turnout was just not great. It was not something that and it was one of my first alumni events. It was not what I would have felt great about. And on the car ride back home, and this is coming from a seasoned president, she said, any of this work worth doing is going to take time and consistency. And to have that freedom from leadership to do the work right, to take your time. And I think we all know this, being close to the work, that the institutions that have done this best, it may not be they have the most innovative programs. Often they've just been consistent. They've been consistent, and their constituency knows what to expect from them. And so I have appreciated that at Denver. Got a chance to work with Chancellor Jeremy Hafner, who just a dynamic, incredible leader. And then here, coming to work for President Smotrisk, who 7 years into his tenure here at UNT was a president at UNLV before. Just a patience for the work of advancement, which is the difference between microwaving a steak and smoking a steak. You just get different results when you allow for a little bit of time to do it right, and to let the flavors kind of seep in, let the anchors kind of get set, so that you can get sustainable operations out of the advancement enterprise. So both are emerging R1 institutions. That's a whole interesting dynamic. DU became an R1 this past year, just at the beginning of 2022. UNT became an R1 in 2015. There's energy and excitement around the emergence as an R1 and the whole shape of the institution. So yes, a lot of differences on the surface, but committed leadership, and energetic enthusiasm around not only the academy, but the work of engagement as well.
Yeah. Great stuff, Brandon. Thank you. So Chris, as you sort of listening to Brandon, sizing up what he's been going through, thinking about the two different institutions, what do you think, Brandon's likely encountering there in terms of the differences of approach and alumni engagement, or just the different thinking that comes with the two different universities?
So you're going to make me make a prediction of a school I don't know much about. So Brandon, tell me
It's
if I'm right on this. But typically, if you could leave a private institution to a public, smaller, more intimate, more residential experience to one that could have some of that, but also may have some people coming and going, you have, I would describe it as a different evolutionary stage of where a program might be in their alumni engagement function. So at a DU, which is, I love that University of Denver calls themselves DU. I just throw that out there. Right? Probably a little further along, and we could take other schools and put them further down the path, like a Princeton or other places that have been doing it for hundreds of years. UNT is probably a little earlier on. So I think about it in terms of evolutionary stage, institutional commitment, not just resource-wise, but I'm talking about whether or not alumni engagement has been important to your current president versus the presidents before him, and so on back. That's a big deal of what stage you're in, first of all. And then, of course, resources. How many staff you have, and how many alumni do you have per each of those staff is going to be a lot different at a private than at a public institution. Budget lines and so forth are the places that I typically see when it changes like you have. How'd I do, Brandon? Was I close?
Pretty close. Yeah. Yes. I think you're pretty right on there, Chris.
Great.
Good enough. Way to step up to the plate there, Chris.
Right,
I thought that was good.
He's being kind. It's probably nothing like I said. He's just being nice.
So, Brandon, so you've been there for about a year, and maybe just better than a year now. And what surprised you the most about the unique challenges facing the evolution of your advancement program there?
So I think one thing that can be said of most public institutions, with the exception of maybe a number of large land grants, kind of the flagship of systems, most publics were fairly late to the game in the work of advancement. Privates had to be on top of this. And ironically, I don't want to get myself in trouble here. I think University of Michigan was early in that game, right? So there were publics that were early on. But the moment they decided to jump in was not the only determining factor of success. It was also, who did they hire to do that? Because sometimes it was the president knew a dean who was transitioning, or a football coach came in as the primary advancement person. And so when they started is one factor, how they started is another factor. And at UNT, it was late to the game, probably 80s that really started in earnest, but it was academicians that were coming in, kind of learning how to lead. And it was only until recent history, in the past 10 years, that anyone was even hired with an advancement background, with a professional fundraising background. And I think that's an important moment in the life of an institution. And I think what surprised me was, in one regard, how the organization had tolerated systems that anyone outside of the system would say, wow, how are we making this work? You learn to manage a jalopy, if that's all you've been driving. And it just, all that to say, I was surprised at the amount of work we had to do to kind of take apart parts of the engine, advancement services, really looking at data in a fundamentally different way. I would say this moment in time, though, is interesting because in a lot of ways, learning not only from your peers and colleagues, but technology has flattened a lot of what would traditionally have been substantial upstarting cost for getting this done, right? I think both from the vendor side, vendors have become more sophisticated in terms of their ability to help bring advancement shops back up to speed, but also I think the advancement learning space from peers, colleagues, through organizations like CASE and others has just accelerated the ability to iterate more quickly. And so version 1.1, 1.2, 2.0 of any advancement shop that may be later to the game can be accelerated. And that's really the path that I've been on. And I've been, in one regard, surprised at how much work we had to go back and do, but on the other hand, surprised at how quickly we could get in and do it. Because as things like machine learning, business intelligence, data analytics have become more global functions, we are seeing more experienced advancement professionals that can come in and really lend an expertise quickly and bring you up to speed. And that talent has become relatively more affordable to accelerate your ability to do that. Whereas 10 years ago, I mean, it was only elite institutions that were hiring PhDs in data science to build their own sophisticated donor modeling platforms. I mean, now you can buy that capacity at a fraction of the cost of hiring a full-time employee. So those were a couple things that surprised me in year one.
There's been a lot of interesting articles published recently about the opportunities around hiring freelancers and outsourcing different components and bringing in technology elements to do a lot of the work that advancement shops need to do fundamentally. I think there's a lot going on there. I'm sure there's tons to be working on, and the data infrastructure, it kind of all starts with the ability to get data in, pull it out, and make data-driven decisions based on policy and based on strategy. And, it makes sense to me, Brandon, that as coming in, you really look to that part of the middle of the organization to make sure it's the scaffolding is in place in a proper way. Every once in a while, we throw out some fill in the blank questions. We've actually gotten some feedback from folks that they really like fill in the blank questions. We don't do it every week, but just to get to know you a bit better, here's a question, a fill in the blank, or a finish this sentence question, actually, not fill in the blank. So an advancement program led by Brandon Buzbee is going to be known for X.
Okay. I'll say three things: aspiration, perspiration, and innovation. I would say those. We work hard. We aspire to do things that haven't been done before, and we never let convention tie us to the way those things get done.
I like it. And the perspiration is not just because it's 100 degrees in Texas.
It might be partly because it's 105 degrees and unrelenting for months and months that it's happening. But in a place like Colorado, sweat is harder to come by. You really earn your sweat in Colorado. So
I hope you've enjoyed the sweating as much as possible. But Chris, let me throw it over to you. How have you think about sort of the guiding values and principles that you've had when you were leading teams at Lehigh and Cornell? How did you lean on the types of core values that Brandon was talking about?
I'm going to go with aspiration, perspiration, and I don't have such a good answer, but I think if I look back or to describe, I would say integrated, in that I'm not shy about the fact that we need to lean in, and engagement is not just for the sake of engagement. It's for driving institutional priorities. And it could be, 4, 5, 6 different things that are measurable. I'll get to that in a second. But one of them we can't be shy about is the fact that engagement will impact giving. And for a long time, when I arrived, our industry had been sort of hiding behind the fact that we're the friend raisers. And not everybody. I'm certainly people embrace this, but where we are today is a much different mindset as an industry, where we're much more integrated. And I brought those both to those places, that sort of mindset and model of thinking of we're going to lean into the fundraising side in some way. So integrated, measured. I came out, I spent 12 years as a collegiate swimming coach, and we measured to the 100th of a second, knew every stroke count and yard they swam and or meter they competed in and so on. When I got to alumni engagement in 01, I said, what's our scoreboard look like? What does success look like? And I didn't get a good answer. So I've been on a journey for 22 years, helping and including with Case, building an engagement scoring model that allows us to look. It's not for the sake of comparing or competing. It's showing that we're improving, that there's a return on the investment. I call it ROE, return on that engagement. So measurable outcomes is another one. But the third one I would say is something you mentioned already, Brandon, which is, I get criticized for being too scientific or metric driven. But what you commented on, the art form, at the end of the day, it's about building relationships with people. And our work needs to be about that. I totally get that. But if we only say that and are only about the art form, the people who make decisions about where our resources come from will be less inclined to invest in that than they were to say, here's what we did, and here's the impact that it had. So I'm big about that part, but also, go back to the relationship part is key.
Well, and Ryan, can I jump? I just want to jump in on
yeah.
something that Chris was saying. Chris, I think one of the journeys that I've been on as a leader is, I economics major from UCSD, home of econometrics. So it was all about the numbers, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
I'm a very analytical, strategic person. And in my time in Denver, we were really building and honing and harnessing from getting alumni engagement metrics on the board to then developing a set of scoring mechanisms and all of that to understand more depth of engagement.
Sure. Right.
But in the midst of that, we found ourselves a little bit tied in knots because we were incentivizing and our staff would get tripped up because it was performing to the number. In some, you want a high performing, accountable organization.
Sure. Right.
But the balance to that, or the challenge in that, is it's one of those both and challenges in the work of advancement. It is both high degrees of accountability and it's high degrees of connectivity and a depth of connection into what is it that we're actually trying to do and drive. Because, and I'm thinking Howard Wolf here from Stanford, I sat through many fierce debates in the private college and university space that was about, the role and value of metrics. And I think Howard's largely was on how do we really, what are we after? What are we trying to get to? And I think it's an important question for us to hold us in tension as we're measuring everything is, yes, you may be putting ticks on the board, but do they feel better about the institution? Do they feel more engaged? Not do you track them as being more engaged, but does an alum actually self-identify as being engaged? And so then you come in with tools and mechanisms like, an attitudinal survey population-wide every 3 to 5 years to help you kind of counterbalance some of that. But I just have struggled as a leader. It's like, yes, on one hand, you're right. There's a tension. You have to prove value and an ROE on everything you're doing on the engagement side. And you also have to make sure the staff are grounded.
And I'll throw one other and in there too. And in the context of today's climate and attitudes about higher education, you throw that into the mix here and you have schools that are struggling to stay alive. So if you're at one of those schools, the work we're doing will be more scientifically bent and focused on what impact it's going to have on the investment that we're going to get out of it versus the art form of building relationships, because some of these places are out there struggling for survival. So the other and in the equation is context of sort of where we are historically and in our the way we view higher education as a population, but institutions who there's every year we hear of schools that are closing down. And what does that mean for that alumni population? Howard talks about that too. What will happen to the alumni population if the school were to close down? It's another great conversation.
So much to talk about. And I think the idea of building relationships with alumni and the idea of getting more personalized with our technology and our engagement is part of the same conversation. It's all one important connected strategy to reach our alumni in real time as they're moving forward in lives, or if they want to look back or think back or travel back, to be nimble with our content and our technology, our events and initiatives to provide that feeling of a relationship with the university. And it's part of why I really enjoy this work, because it's challenging and it's fun and it feels like you're doing good. But we're going to continue this conversation with Brandon. We bumped up against the top of the show already. It always goes by fast. So we're going to tackle some 30 minutes more with Brandon. We're really excited about that. We've got thankful for Protopia for sponsoring our first ever episode together in our partnership. And we will thank all of our listeners for joining us, picking up the podcast version or seeing us in a couple of weeks. We'll be back with Annie Quaddy from UTEP. I actually said Annie was this week. I misspoke. She is in 2 weeks' time from now.
But we're staying in Texas for 2 episodes in a row.
That's true. 2 episodes
As
in a
you
row.
should.
Don't mess with Texas, right? But so for Chris and for Brandon, I'm Ryan signing off, and we'll see you on the podcast edition. Bye, everybody.